This year's incoming rookie quarterback class might not have the eye-popping names atop the list, but that doesn't mean that there aren't guys going later in the draft that could find a path to fantasy relevance. Today, Jeff Bell and I, we are going to not only look at this incoming class of rookies, but we're also going to compare them to some of the previous classes and see how these guys kind of fold in to guys that we've seen play on an NFL field for a little bit. But Jeff, let's start with the rookies first. And right now, it appears like Cam Ward is locked in as the number one overall pick for the Tennessee Titans. Tell me, what exactly makes you think Cam Ward is worthy of that number one overall pick?
I mean, he's got what teams are looking for in a modern NFL quarterback right now. He's got athleticism. He's got arm talent to hit every single throw that you could possibly want. We saw that video come out of his pro day, and that was not a 100-yard field, but that definitely was a
They got me,
bomb
though.
that he hit
They
there.
got me. I did the math, and I was like,
And
that
you
ball just
made it
went
get
85
me.
yards.
Yes. Yes, no, but that's really what it is. It's the ability to move him around out of structure, work on RPO type actions, attack every single level of the field, and so he brings that and in spades really. And you kind of look at the upside that you're dealing with, and that's where you're going to bet on these quarterbacks early in the draft is that upside.
Now, Jeff, you do a lot of player comps, and I think that you are just a maestro when it comes to making
Two
these player comps. Do you remember the player comp that you came up with for Cam Ward? Because I haven't seen anybody else make the comp, and I absolutely love it, Jeff.
Baker Mayfield was my comp for Cam Ward back in January. I comped into Baker Mayfield because I was pretty confident that he would go first in the draft. And again, it's another that you talk about the ability to play off platform. Baker Mayfield has that, plus arm talent. Mayfield has that as well. And so Ward is bringing those tools in.
Now, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about Cam Ward because I think he is a polarizing prospect. We've heard so much talk about like, well, Cam Ward would have been the QB3 or the QB4 in last year's class. And I think we just forget exactly how loaded that class was. I mean, we saw 5 guys go inside the top 12 and almost all of them did get starts outside of JJ McCarthy inside their rookie season, which is just unheard of. So just saying that he's not as good as the guys that came in last year doesn't mean that he's a bad quarterback by any means. And I did a study last year looking at quarterbacks who were drafted number one overall, and they are one of the safest investments that you can make in Dynasty. And of course, you are going to have the guys that face plan, and people remember the Jamarcus Russells and the Sam Bradfords. But the reality is that a quarterback drafted number one overall has a 70% likelihood of passing for 4,000 yards at some point in their season. They have an 80% likelihood of starting 80 plus games, which is 5 seasons in the NFL, 70% chance of making the Pro Bowl, 65% chance of a playoff win. These are just arbitrary numbers that I kind of came up with to deem as successful metrics for a quarterback. But if you are getting that sort of a success rate from a guy ranked number one overall, that's why I've talked about it on this show. I have him ranked ahead of Ashton Ginty for that reason. I just think the ceiling for Cam Ward is so high. Jeff, do you have a strong take between Cam Ward or Ginty in Superflex drafts?
I'm probably leaning a little bit closer to Cam now that we're getting closer to the draft, and we feel pretty comfortable that he is going to be the first pick. I think there was a lot of uncertainty, and I think what happened, there was a lot of uncertainty coming into it, and there were maybe some unfair comparisons to a Malik Willis or something like that in his draft class. And if you remember back, he was the 101 in a lot of January drafts because we thought he was going to go early, and then that didn't happen. But now that you're getting closer to the draft, you talk about that insulated security. We see it again and again in Dynasty. I mean, even people will talk about a dip on Bryce Young's value, but I think if you really looked at the value, it didn't really dip that much. And that was one of the worst rookie years ever. And we've seen that even come back now. And I think that it's that early consensus take that was in there that Ashton Ginty is the number one player in this class, and he's the reason why you're tanking, whatever it might be. But then as you get closer to it and you're a little bit more pragmatic about it in Superflex, you see where the way that your rosters are built, I think it has to be a serious consideration.
Yeah, I think we're going to let this Cam Ward conversation breathe a little bit because we haven't really talked about Cam Ward all that much. But the other thing I'll say is, your comp to Baker Mayfield, I think that is the exact example of why you want to invest in a quarterback going number one overall. I mean, he showed some flashes in Cleveland, but the team very much so gave up on him. Well, guess what? Carolina rolled the dice on Baker Mayfield, and then the Los Angeles Rams nice again on Baker Mayfield. And then he finally gets a fourth opportunity in Tampa Bay where he takes off, and now he's a consensus top 10 quarterback in fantasy. Jared Goff was another guy that I think people would look at his start of his career and say that he was a disappointing number one overall pick. Well, guess what? He got moved to Detroit, where another team took a chance on him, and a consistent QB1 in fantasy football. Trevor Lawrence is another good example of a guy drafted number one overall. Might not have put up the gaudiest numbers, but he has shown flashes. Jacksonville gave him another second contract. They went out and they have tried multiple times now to surround him with playmakers. And I think that's it. You're looking at that insulated value because when a team makes that sort of investment in a quarterback, number one overall in the draft, they want to do whatever they can to see him succeed. Anything else to note on Cam Ward before we move to the next guy on our list?
Well, I think you made an interesting point talking about people making the argument that he would have been quarterback 4 in last year's class. And I think when you look at that, I think Drake May was held against him unfairly last year. I think that there's a lot of years that Drake May would have been the number one quarterback and the number one pick in the NFL draft last year because of the talent in front of him between Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels. I think you saw kind of blowback and pushback on his valuation. And then once you see him out on the field playing well for a team in New England that nobody had any expectations for at all, there was kind of a knee-jerk reaction to push him back up.
Yeah. Well, let's keep talking about more quarterbacks here. Shedeur Sanders, we have in the same tier as Cam Ward, and I think we have Cam Ward comfortably ahead of Shedeur Sanders. But a lot of the smoke that we're getting right now is that Cleveland might be interested in taking him at second overall. We've heard that the Giants might be interested in taking him at third overall. However it shakes out, I don't see him slipping past 6. That's where the Las Vegas Raiders are, and I know that they already have Geno Smith, but they might want to plan for the future. And if he falls that far, I'd be shocked to see Shedeur Sanders fall beyond pick number 6. And if he is there, there might even be another team that wants to trade up for him. Basically, what I'm getting at is that Shedeur Sanders should also command top 10 draft capital, and that makes him a relatively safe investment as well. So talk to me a little bit about Shedeur Sanders, because it has been a wild ride for him so far this offseason. We've heard that he was going to be, the potential number 1 overall pick. Then all of a sudden we start hearing maybe he's going to fall outside of round 1. Now he's back up into the top 2, top 3 conversation. Where do you think Shedeur Sanders ends up going?
Where do I think I'm not sure where he goes in the draft, to be honest with you. I think that my gut right now says it's either Cleveland, Pittsburgh, or the Saints is where he ends up. I think that one of those 3 teams, and not Cleveland at 2. I think that Cleveland, I think it could be interesting if they I think they're pretty locked in on Travis Hunter at 2, and then trying to pair them up and come back up later in the draft, or use that early second round pick to move back up and get Shedeur. I have I really struggle with what's coming out about Shedeur, because when I look at him, I see a player that he's comfortable playing outside of structure. He's definitely poised. He's been through a lot. He's seen a lot as a college player, and he's handled that all great. It's all these things that you would check all the boxes for what you want to see out of your franchise quarterback. We haven't seen him run in college, but then he had the nugget that he released a week or 2 ago talking about that he wasn't ever asked to do that, and maybe he could do that if he were asked to do that, which kind of raises your eyebrows a little bit. But I mean, the biggest difference I think between him and Cam Ward is just pure arm talent. Cam Ward has, I think, high end arm talent, whereas Shedeur, I'm confident he can make the throws that he needs to make, but he's going to be a little bit stronger operating maybe in the short to intermediate areas. And so that's probably the 2 biggest differences between those 2. But again, it's all over the board when you're talking about he might be the second pick in the draft, or he might be, I don't know, outside of the top 10. And it seems one person has one thing, another person has another. To me, it would be, if we knew he was going to go number 2, we would know right now he's going to go number 2 is probably the way I see
it. And I think what makes Sanders such a difficult player to assess is because he had so much talent around him that when you watch him play and you see a lot of these big plays, you're saying, was that Shedeur, or was that Travis Hunter or Jimmy Horn or LeJontay Wester, these other guys that they have over on that team. So I think that is another kind of piece to this puzzle, is he did what was asked of him. He was surrounded by talented playmakers and he got the ball to those playmakers. But is he the type of guy that can overcome a bad situation? I think that's a big question mark right now. And a lot of those teams picking atop the draft are going to put him in what would end up being a bad situation. So I still think that Falling outside of the top 5 or 6 is pretty unlikely. I think that some team is going to want to take a chance here because desperation can cause for silly decisions, and there are a lot of teams out there that are desperate. Before we move on to tier 2, Jeff, Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, anything else you would like to add on these two players?
No, I think that they're wrapped up pretty well there. It's just, I mean, we were pretty confident Cam Ward is going to be the number one pick in the NFL draft, and like I said, if Shedeur Sanders is going to go number 2, we're kind of reaching the range where we would feel really good about knowing that.
Now for a tier that seems to pop up every single year in NFL draft season, the guys with day 2 grades that are getting round 1 smoke. And again, we talk about desperation kind of being a driving factor for a lot of teams around the NFL draft. And right now, Jaxson Dart and Jalen Milroe, I'll actually flip-flop those because we have Jalen Milroe ahead of Jaxson Dart. So Jalen Milroe and Jaxson Dart, we have it 3 and 4. Now these are both players that have warts in their game, but have the tools to really blossom into good NFL players. And because of those tools, we could see them get drafted a little bit higher than day 2. Now, I just tweeted out the other day that I think Jalen Milroe was a guy that he'd been in the draft class 5 years ago, probably would have been top 5, top 10 consideration. You remember there was this big push after Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts. These toolsy, athletic quarterbacks came to the league and developed into superstars, and a lot of teams copied that blueprint by drafting Justin Fields and Anthony Richardson and Trey Lance. And I think because it didn't pan out with those guys, now Jalen Milroe is kind of the guy who is catching the wake of that, those guys that didn't necessarily pan out. And I think because of that, he's falling into the late first, early round 2 discussion. But where do you think Jalen Milroe deserves to go? We kind of tossed around the idea of Pittsburgh Steelers a couple of weeks ago on the show, and I can't stop thinking about how much fun that would be.
Who won the Super Bowl this year, Dave?
It was the Philadelphia Eagles, and they did it
Who's
with a
their
round 2
quarterback?
quarterback.
Who's their quarterback? Jalen Hurts.
Jalen Hurts, round 2 guy.
What's the book on Jalen Hurts? He's a runner, athletic guy. He can
Good
throw
processor.
downfield. He's smart, and the intermediate short is this a little bit of a struggle for him. I mean, that's Jalen Milroe, basically. I believe he's got 2 degrees from Alabama that he's graduated. Maybe he graduated with his master's in 4 years, I think is what it was. And so he's very, very smart and very, very athletic. And he's got a rocket arm. Yeah, the short to intermediate stuff is a concern, but you saw somebody win the Super Bowl with a quarterback that the short to intermediate stuff is a concern. And when you have that rushing ability, that opens up the doors that you can get by with the short stuff a little bit more. And especially we saw that Eagles offense when they put Saquon Barkley there with Jalen Hurts, and Barkley's ability to open things up for Hurts out of the run game and to rely on there and not really have to worry about attacking in the short area of the passing game because you can run the ball at will and be able to attack vertically with Devonta Smith and with AJ Brown. And so you talk about Pittsburgh there. I mean, they've really built up their offensive line the last couple of years. That's always been a knock. Now they have DK Metcalf, they have George Pickens, 2 guys that can attack downfield. And so you're looking at a power run game with 2 players that can attack vertically in the passing game. And you put a Jalen Milroe in there with that ability to stretch the field with his arm and then allow him to run underneath. I mean, that's a perfect match there. And so I think some of it is what we're seeing. Quarterbacks are the stars of the NFL draft, and teams, the media tries their very, very best to make it kind of that storyline there. And coming into it, I think Jaxson Dart seemed like the most pro type quarterback when we were earlier in the process. But then as you start to get down to it and teams start to look and say, again, who won the Super Bowl last year? And that's what we see often kind of play out with some of these teams that are trying to make the jump or trying to build their team of trying to emulate what won the Super Bowl last year. And I think that there are, other than Alabama and athleticism and big arms, there's a lot in common between Jalen Hurts and Jalen Milroe.
And I think that you make a really good
too.
Yes. I think you make a good point too, that like he is a very good processor, and he might not have the touch on the short throws, but he sees the open receivers. And that's something Matt Waldman was just on with Sigmund Bloom last week. First of all, huge shout out to Matt Waldman. He just came out with his rookie scouting report. I blew that. rookie scouting portfolio, you definitely need to check this out. Over 1,200 written pages on the incoming classes. And he has been doing his rounds this week, guesting on a bunch of different podcasts. But he did a show with our Sigmund Bloom on the couch, and just a must-watch show every single year when those two guys get together. But he talked about that same thing you're talking about, Jeff, how he is very similar to Jalen Hurts and that he can read defenses. He finds the open receivers. And the one thing he needs to work on is that touch in the short game. But the sky is so high for a guy with Jalen Milroe's skill set. And that's why, we talked about it a couple of weeks ago. I came out with my mock draft last Monday, and I mocked Jalen Milroe to the Pittsburgh Steelers at 21, and I got hell from Steelers fans for it. But then this weekend, he was invited to the draft. Now, maybe he is just the guy that they want in the draft room, that they can keep the cameras on for the entire day. This year's Will Levis or Malik Willis, whoever you want. But I still think that there's a team out there that's going to see that skill set, see the rushing upside, see the athletic measurables, see the brains, see the big arm. I think somebody is going to take a chance in round one. And because of that reason, even if both of these guys do fall to round two, Jalen Milroe and Jaxson Dart, if either of them is getting a spot start, Jalen Milroe has the profile where he can put up 30, 35 points in a game. I don't think you're ever going to see that sort of upside from Jaxson Dart.
Flashback to this time last year, it seemed the consensus was that Michael Penix was a second-round pick. It wasn't even considered to be. I mean, it was a legitimate shock, not only that he went to Atlanta, but that he went top 10. Even on draft night, it was a shock that he went top 10 because he seemed to be the guy that had fallen back from the other players. And he's not athletic as he was in his very, very early part of his career. He had 2 bad knee injuries in college, but he has that huge arm there. And we saw him go in the top 10 to the Falcons.
And the Falcons, which if you remember, just less than a month before the draft, gave Kirk Cousins $80 million guaranteed. So I see a lot of people see this Geno Smith extension and say, well, the Raiders are completely out on drafting a quarterback now. I still don't think it's that crazy. If they're sitting there at 6 and Shedeur Sanders is on the board, that they might take that chance and kind of use Geno Smith in the same way the Falcons used Kirk Cousins last year. All right, we talked about Jaxson Dart a little bit, Jeff. Is there anything you want to talk a little bit more on that? Alfredo Brown and I, we came out with a show yesterday talking about Jaxson Dart, and we were doing our superlative show where we kind of do like most likely to ... kind of yearbook style. And one of them was most likely to join Jameis Winston in the 30 for 30 club. And my nomination for that was Jaxson Dart because he has never seen a covered receiver.
I like that. I was going to say that there's some people that really, really like Jaxson Dart, and to say I say, bless you. Go. I think if Jaxson Dart were as good as some people think, then Jaxson Dart would be really, really good. I don't know. I think you make a good point, and I flash back to, I believe it was the Florida game late in the year when Ole Miss was trying to make a playoff push, and there had to have been like 6 different interceptions that were just dropped, that he was just putting it out there. And then you see the numbers that the interception totals weren't that high, but if you watch him, he was certainly trying very, very hard to make those interception totals pretty high.
And also, like, how much of Jaxson Dart's production came the fact that they just didn't have a run game. We were talking with Zare about this earlier in our Football Guys group chat. There was no run game there. And, you go back a few years ago when they had Woody Marks there. He was their lead running back, but he was just getting fed checkdowns.
He was at Mississippi State.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry.
Ole Miss was Judson before last year.
That's right. And this year in 2024, they just didn't have any sort of run game. So you look at the 4,200 plus passing yards, and that was inflated because their run game was essentially throwing the ball to Trey Harris on Scranton screens and letting him do what he does. So I'm not the biggest fan of Jaxson Dart, but getting some steam and might be a round 1 pick. Let's move down the board a little bit, and I think these are the guys that would really shock us if they went round 1. Not completely off the table, but these are guys that we expect more likely than not to end up going day 2. Quinn Ewers and Tyler Shough, both guys that we like, were productive in college and have the tools to be NFL quarterbacks, but just might not have the upside that teams are looking for. So between these two guys, Jeff, Quinn Ewers, and Tyler Shough, who do you prefer and why?
I'm going to be honest here that I don't really know how to value Quinn Ewers, just because you look at the deep game was a big struggle in his time in Texas, and he had the receivers that should not have been a struggle at all. He really struggled in the deep game. He was decent in the short game. I mean, he was the number one quarterback in his recruiting class just 3 years ago. He left Texas. He might have lost his job in Texas had he stayed in Texas. So it might have been less, I'm ready for the NFL, and more, I'm going to lose my job to Arch Manning if I stay here. And so now is the time to go. I don't, it's just a struggle on how to evaluate him, I guess, is probably where I land, because I think that there are things that teams classically would have been interested in terms of being a, accuracy in the short game, like processing maybe ish, but at the same time, you stack him up against some of these players that we're going to talk about after him, and I don't know that he gets drafted before them.
Yeah, and we're deep enough in the show now that I could just be honest. I don't really care about watch time or retention rate or anything. Now that we're at the 20-minute mark of this show,
I'm
when it
glad to
comes to
know that.
quarterbacks,
Stop caring at 20 minutes. So
when it comes to quarterbacks, man, I'm just gonna follow draft capital. Like, it is quarterback scouting from college to the pros is witchcraft. I mean, like, you see guys that you least expect turn into superstars, and guys that are number one overall might get the leash but still not pan out. I mean, Cecil Lammey talks about it all the time. Scheme fit is the most important thing when it comes to a quarterback and how they'll do at the next level. So, if this guy, any of these guys, land with the wrong team, they're not going to pan out. And if they land in a situation where they fit the scheme and they get a chance to see the field, maybe they can. But really, when you're looking at any of these guys, day 2 quarterbacks, day 3 quarterbacks, look through the list of guys that have been drafted day 2 and day 3 over the last 30 years. We remember Brock Purdy. We remember Tom Brady. And that's pretty much the end of the list, because there's nobody else memorable beyond that.
So I tend to land in the Bill Parcells school of thought when it comes to quarterback prospects. Of, I want a guy that has played a lot of football,
Yeah.
and not necessarily. I think where you run into trouble, what you see, it seems like some of these guys that bust is you get these guys that were blue chip players that landed at an elite school, and maybe they play for a year or two and they're surrounded by a ton of talent, and then they go high in the draft because, well, how can he fail? And then it turns out that he was never really asked to solve all that much. You didn't really have to see all that much complex stuff. And then you see some of these other players that you think about, a Brock Purdy. I mean, he was playing with Breece Hall, and that certainly helped. And there was some NFL receivers that he had there that helped. But that Iowa State team, when he took over, wasn't the most talented team. And so there were a lot of things that he needed to figure out and grow and learn with. And so I think that that's one thing that I do come down on when it comes to these later quarterbacks, and even some of these earlier quarterbacks, of somebody that's seen a lot. You flash back to both Cam Ward he started out a very, very small school, was a no-star prospect, was at Washington State on a team without a ton of talent, and then going to Miami that did have more talent. And then you see Shedeur Sanders starting out at Jacksonville State, and obviously playing with his dad, but he was the quarterback from day one there, won a national championship for Jacksonville State, I believe, and then going to Colorado and seeing firsthand that transition of that program. He's seen a lot of different things. Relative to Quinn Ewers, spent a year at Ohio State, didn't really see the field there,
Yeah.
came into Texas and has been the starter the last 2 years, but he's made the playoffs. But is there a single big Quinn Ewers moment? Because I don't know of one.
Yeah. Well, let's go to this next tier of quarterbacks here. There's more quarterbacks that might get drafted, but I think these are the last ones that we really, I don't want to say care about, but the last guys we'll talk about here: Riley Leonard, Will Howard, Kurtis Rourke, Brady Cook, Dillon Gabriel, Kyle McCord. Jeff, out of those 6 guys, is there one that you think could end up panning out into being a reliable NFL player?
I still like Kurtis Rourke. I think he went to my alma mater, Ohio University. Maybe that's why. But I think that when you look at it, he's a toolsy guy. His brothers has spent time in the NFL and around the NFL through camps, so that's part of it. You talk about a player that's seen a lot. He was the quarterback at Ohio University, and he definitely saw a lot there. And then he led Indiana, of all teams, to the college football playoff in his 1 year there, played through some major injuries, and he should be healthier. And that's a guy that I think he's an older prospect, which might be a knock. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of potential there. I mean, Riley Leonard, I worry about his ability to throw downfield, but if we're talking about fantasy football, if Riley Leonard gets on the field, he is the type of
He's
player you flash back to, Dave. I know you've played fantasy long enough, but Tim Tebow was a
yep.
fantasy, he wasn't exactly a fantasy god, but he was a top 12
He was a
quarterback in very
QB1
much this. Yeah, I mean, very much the same way. Not
throwing for like
quite, but
120 yards a game.
right, right. And that's where like people talk about Justin Fields. Justin Fields is throwing for almost double what Tim Tebow was throwing for when he was breaking out. So you've got that, and that's kind of the Riley Leonard path. I still like Will Howard too. I know he struggled at the combine, but that's not really his game. And maybe I think there's a chance that his playoff run with Ohio State, he just channeled Nick Foles the way that Nick Foles won the Super Bowl with the Eagles and played outside of his mind. But I think that there were things in that playoff run that really, really translate for Will Howard. And he's, again, a bigger guy, definitely has athleticism, and he is the type of quarterback that would struggle in that combine setting.
Now let's get to the fun part, Jeff. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of these guys that are coming in to the NFL, and we're going to kind of fold in some other young prospects from the 21, 22, 23, 24 class and kind of see where they would shake out. So let's start with 2021 first. And I think this is a great question because these guys are side by side on Keep Trade Cut right now. Trevor Lawrence or Cam Ward, who would you prefer?
I'm going to lean toward Cam Ward. Probably, I still like Trevor Lawrence quite a bit, but I think leaning towards a little bit more youth, a little bit more. Maybe it's the uncertainty that you want versus the uncertainty that you're afraid of, probably relative to Lawrence. But I think it's interesting that they're valued next to each other, and I think that that's fair that they're valued next to each other.
Now let's stick with that 2021 class and Justin Fields, who is now on his third team since getting drafted, but all signs point to him being the starter for the New York Jets this year. This is an interesting one because you can almost make an argument that in Dynasty, with the way that fantasy points are accumulated, you can put Justin Fields ahead of everybody in this class, ahead of Trevor Lawrence. I don't know which route you're going to go here because we do have some questions about the longevity for Justin Fields, even if he does it this year. Can he do it next year and the year after that and the year after that? So looking at this class, the rankings that we just went through, where would you kind of slot Justin Fields in this list of rankings?
Quarterback 3, probably right there
So
with Jalen
behind Shedeur
Milroe and
Sanders.
behind Shedeur Sanders, and
Yeah.
waiting to see what capital Jalen Milroe gets. And if he's a first round pick to the Steelers, I think that then you're putting Jalen Milroe above Justin Fields. But you talk about just give us 1 year. I think Justin Fields is the type of player, the type of athlete that if we just get 1 year out of it, that just opens up the doors, I think, wide open for a team buying in long term or longer term on Fields. And we just we've seen glimpses. I mean, there was that run, I think it was 2 years ago, maybe, when he had the really, really good stretch against like the Commanders
Out
on
of the
Thursday Night
bye
Football. And
with DJ
yeah,
Moore. Yeah, and he
yeah.
looked
And
like a
then
superstar for a month.
yes, and then he got hurt because the Bears didn't want him to do good, and they just didn't. There was that one awful game plan against the Vikings where they were basically like, "Yeah, we're just not going to block these blitzers up the middle," and God bless Justin Fields, and then got knocked out. But that was like right off of that run.
Yeah. And I think, Justin Fields such an intriguing buy right now in Dynasty because at worst, I feel like you're getting top 10 quarterback production for this year. At best, you're getting a guy who could be a top 5 quarterback for the next 5 years. I mean, the range of outcomes is so wide, but there's a safer floor than I think people realize, and the ceiling. If he has a good year, if he comes out this year, throws for 88 or 3,800 yards, rushes for 700 yards, either the Jets are going to bring him back next year on that second year team option, or another team is going to go out there and break the bake for Justin Fields. So I think that there is a lot of upside in going out and acquiring Justin Fields right now. Now, this, if you remember, Jeff, that 2021 class, I don't know why I said if you remember. Of course you remember. This was the draft class that was supposed to change the NFL. You know, we had Zach Wilson and Trey Lance and Justin Fields and Trevor Lawrence and Mac Jones and all these guys going in the first round. Didn't really pan out that well, but of the guys we haven't talked about yet, Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, Mac Jones, who do you prefer best of those three, and where would they kind of fit in for you in this list of rankings?
None.
That's fair.
I mean,
yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
Trey Lance
I mean,
is in the NFL.
Yeah, he is in the NFL. Canada came calling, and the Chargers said we can't let that happen. But from what we've seen on the field, I think you probably have to go with Mac Jones because we've seen at least passable quarterback play from Mac Jones for certain windows. And I mean, last year he wasn't winning any games in Jacksonville, but he wasn't derailing their offense completely. I mean, Zach Wilson can make the argument that if things work out and Tua Tagovailoa misses any level of time and Tyreek Hill is still Tyreek Hill and he's still a Dolphin, then I mean certainly that's a decent setup there for him. But yeah, from what you've seen, you probably have to go with Mac Jones.
Yeah. Now let's go to the 2022 draft class. And man, like if looking at previous draft classes doesn't make you feel pessimistic about this upcoming draft class, I don't know what will. I mean, there are so many big names here that we got really excited about and just haven't really panned out, unfortunately. Looking at 2022, it was the last guy selected in the draft that's the only one that has any fantasy relevance right now, Brock Purdy. So I guess my question for you, Jeff, I think we both would agree that Brock Purdy is valued well ahead of Shedeur Sanders. But I guess the question is Cam Ward or Brock Purdy, similar to what we just said about Trevor Lawrence.
It's surprising me because on Keep Trade Cut, I believe Brock Purdy is ranked above Cam Ward. I would still go with Cam Ward. I think that I really want to see the way the 49ers work out. Maybe he's still got Christian McCaffrey, still got George Kittle, still got Brandon Ayuk. It will probably be fine. But as you step into that quarterback contract, what is going to be the pieces around him relative to thinking where he was even a year ago with Deebo Samuel, along with that, when we thought everybody was going to be healthy coming off of that potential Super Bowl win that didn't quite come through. I mean, it certainly was a rough year for the 49ers, but longer term, you're talking about two different conversations when you're paying Brock Purdy as Mr. Irrelevant versus paying Brock Purdy market rate at a quarterback level.
Yeah, and I think that's the big thing is they're saying like Brock Purdy's already asked for 50 plus million a year. And Jeff, so much gets lost in the news cycle this time of year. You have a very busy real life as well with your job and being a dad and all that, those sorts of things. So it might have slipped through the cracks. Do you know who Brock Purdy's backup is right now?
Brock Purdy's backup right now.
I'll spoil it for you. It is Mac Jones.
I was wondering where Mac Jones was. Yeah, well, that's right. That makes sense. Yeah, Kyle. I mean, that's who Kyle Shanahan wanted, anyways. So there you go.
So do you think that this acquisition of Mac Jones this offseason might be Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch saying, hey, maybe we can get a look at Mac Jones in the preseason, and rather than paying $55 million a year to Brock Purdy, maybe we can lock up Mac Jones for a quarter of that price. I mean, I don't know, just thinking out loud here, but I think if Brock Purdy gets that contract, if he comes out and gets a 5-year, $250 million contract, we're putting him ahead of Cam Ward. But I think right now, with the uncertainty, I'd prefer Cam Ward to Brock Purdy.
I mean, they aren't the Dallas Cowboys, so I feel like if they wanted to pay Brock Purdy, they probably would have done it by this point, to be honest with you. So I could see them playing that out a little bit. And yeah, I mean, Purdy gets hurt and Mac Jones looks competent. They are the type of franchise that would have that confidence. I mean, Kyle Shanahan is the definition of the coach that would have that confidence to say, Mac Jones can do what I want done in this offense, and I don't need to pay an arm and a leg for you. And we could trade Brock Purdy for something. And why don't we do that?
I mean, that's exactly what they just did with Jordan Mason, right? Like an undrafted guy. They got some production out of him and then traded him away. And again, we're pontificating here. We don't really know what's going to happen. But Mac Jones, for those that aren't aware, in this 2021 draft, if anybody remembers, the 49ers traded a haul to move up to number 3. They traded 3 first-round picks to get that 3rd overall pick. And the rumors out of San Francisco were that Kyle Shanahan wanted Mac Jones. And John Lynch wanted Trey Lance, and they ended up inevitably settling on Trey Lance, which obviously didn't work out. But we saw even, in those summer camps, the San Francisco quarterback situation has always been murky. Like even when we were going in expecting that Trey Lance was going to be the starter, they were saying, no, Brock Purdy's the guy and Sam Darnold's the number 2 and Trey Lance is the QB3. We've never really gotten a clear picture of what they want to do there. So Mac Jones, another intriguing guy that could be deep in your dynasty leagues right now, potentially maybe even on waivers, and is worth a pickup. Now, there were other names in this draft class, Jeff, besides Brock Purdy, Kenny Pickett, Desmond Ritter, Malik Willis, Sam Howell, Skylar Thompson. Any of these guys that you want to talk about? Skylar Thompson, as it stands right now, if the Steelers don't land Aaron Rodgers and don't draft a quarterback, will be competing for the week one job. Malik Willis looked great in the opportunities that he got to start last year, but we don't know if we'll see that anytime soon. So, out of those guys, is there anybody that really piques your interest? And if so, where would they fit here?
I think Malik Willis is the interesting one here because of what we saw last year for the Packers, getting him out of that environment in Tennessee and putting him in with a competent coaching staff and those good wide receivers that the Packers do have, not having a wide receiver one. But I think that that's when you break down the fantasy elements of his game. He does bring that. And again, a passable quarterback play. I think everybody was very, very surprised the way that he looked. And so you give him a second year in that Green Bay system to learn and feel comfortable. And if he has an extended run of good production, if Jordan Love were to miss time, that's exactly the type of player that people would take a chance on. Another team would take a chance on and say, hey, this is a toolsy guy. He's been able to learn a lot. He's had these little windows where he's looked competent relative to. I think it's harder to overcome like Sam Howell, the way that all the sacks and everything in Washington, and then the way that you see
And the
Jaden Daniels
interceptions.
sacks and interceptions. You see Jaden Daniels step in right away and look as good as he did. And granted, that was entirely different coaching staff and more talent around him, but that's one that I think that sticks in your mind, that when you turn on the tape and you're seeing quarterback getting sacked and making mistakes relative to what we were able to see last year out of Malik Willis in a little bit more of a controlled environment, I think that decision makers probably stick with that latter of Malik Willis.
Malik Willis got a bump in my dynasty rankings for one of the most arbitrary reasons ever. But do you remember that week 3 game they beat Tennessee? And I don't know if you remember his post game interview. He was in the locker room, and one of the Packers beat reporters said, like, "Hey, how did it feel to stick it to the Titans after they let you go?" And he just gave the classiest response imaginable, where he said, like, "I've got nothing but love for Tennessee. They drafted me. They gave me the opportunity in this league. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for them." And that just says something about his character. This is the same guy you remember in Indianapolis before the combine was giving away food and clothes to homeless people on the streets of Indianapolis. Like the character from Malik Willis, you could just sense it in every clip, interview, anything that comes out. Just seems like a great guy. And guys like that tend to stick around in the NFL. And whenever he gets his opportunity, he's going to do well with it. So I like that. Real quick, kind of folding it in here. Malik Willis, I think I'd have him ahead of Jaxson Dart, unless Jaxson Dart somehow sneaks into round 1. I think he's below Jalen Milroe for me and ahead of Jaxson Dart, which kind of makes him what would be like the QB4 in this class.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I mean, we want to see where Jaxson Dart goes probably first before you really get there, but a player that has stuck through 3 years, going into 4 years in the NFL.
Yeah. Let's move on to the 2023 class. Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson, Will Levis, Hendon Hooker. Bryce Young, I think, is the one that we need to compare to Cam Young immediately. He was another guy selected 101, disappointing year 1, disappointing start to year 2, but he finished the year on a heater looking really good. I know where I go here. I am a big Bryce Young fan. Loved what I saw at the end of the season. So I would prefer Bryce Young to Cam Ward. Where do you stand on that one, Jeff?
I'm still going to go Cam Ward just because I think that there are very clear limitations in Bryce Young's game. And we did see that. We saw that second half development. A lot of that was you remove him and you allow the other players within that offensive scheme to learn with Andy Dalton to know their jobs. And then once you've done that, then you put Bryce Young back in there and he's able to have success. I mean, there's questions around the weapons, probably arguably for both of these players, because I don't know if we feel great about what Carolina has putting on the field right now. And I mean, Calvin Ridley had windows, but other than that, Tennessee doesn't really stack up with a ton of talent. But again, it's just betting probably on a little bit of a higher outcome with Cam Ward. I think there's a little bit of a higher ceiling there.
Now, I've said it a few times. I don't know if I've said it on this show, but I know I've written about it. And I think I mentioned it on other shows. But I wouldn't be surprised if the Titans, Brian Callahan over there, if they follow the same exact blueprint that they laid out in Cincinnati a few years ago, where they took Joe Burrow 101, and then that first pick in round 2, they went after T. Higgins. And because of the lack of weapons that they have right now in Tennessee, I mean, all they have is an aging Calvin Ridley. Chigakonkwo is there. It's a very short list of weapons that they have there. It wouldn't surprise me if they do the same thing where they take Cam Ward 101 and then whoever the best available receiver is at that pick 35 if they end up going there. So hopefully they can beef up that room a little bit for Cam Ward. And if they do, that'll bump him up in my rankings a little bit. CJ Stroud, I'm assuming that we have CJ Stroud well ahead of everybody in this class, right, Jeff?
Yeah, I think so. It definitely. I mean, certainly people were putting CJ Stroud as quarterback one in Dynasty last year, and that was a little bit aggressive. But
Yeah.
no, at this point, we still feel really good about. I think the downfall of CJ Stroud has been greatly exaggerated. He's all the way to quarterback 10 now in
Oh
keep
my
trade cut.
goodness.
I mean, that's a big
Oh.
boomerang, and I think that's a big buy on CJ Stroud.
Anthony Richardson is another player worth mentioning from this class. Showed the flashes, man. You look at the fantasy points per dropback from his rookie season. It's understandable why he was getting the steam that he was, but there are parts of me that just wonder if he's not going to be a good NFL quarterback. And then there's other parts of me that watch him play in some games and he looks like a budding superstar. I can't help but see so much of what I saw in Justin Fields, where like the intangibles are there, the athleticism is there, but then he just makes these bonehead decisions like on a seemingly quarterly basis. So where would Anthony Richardson fit in for you? I think I'd have him right alongside Jalen Milroe. I'm not sure if I'd put him above or below.
Yeah, again, it probably goes to wanting to see where Milroe actually lands in the draft and putting him right beside there. But I don't know. I'm still a believer in Anthony Richardson. I mean, certainly the talent is there. I think that there are things that you want to see that has taken place. It's kind of the Justin Fields arc, maybe, is where he's at, where you're kind of hoping things fall into place, but you're unsure. But you do know that he does have that potential, especially we're playing fantasy football. Being realistic about it, his game plays very, very well to fantasy football.
My advice on Anthony Richardson is do not buy him right now. Wait until summer camp when Daniel Jones is getting reps with the ones, which Shane Steichen said that they are going to be splitting reps. We got the story right now, but I think a lot of people are unplugged in March and April. When it's July and Daniel Jones is out there and the Colts social media team is sharing camp highlights of Daniel Jones, I think that's when you go out and you buy Anthony Richardson for really cheap.
Where do you think he is in keep trade cut?
I'm going to guess QB 23.
Kubrick 27. So
Yeah. So I think he has a chance to fall even lower because once they say Daniel Jones is getting reps with the one, then he falls outside of the top 32 quarterbacks because then people are worried he's not even a starter. And then he could have a similar rise in a new situation, just like Justin Fields did. Will Levis is another player we got to talk about, Jeff, and we're going to talk about him on another show later this week. Spoiler, don't want to give away too much. But Will Levis, probably getting traded. Maybe not. Maybe they keep him around. I don't really know what the plan is for Will Levis, but where would he fit in here for you? I think I'd have him below Shedeur Sanders, below Jalen Milroe, and probably right next to Jaxson Dart, as they are pretty darn similar players.
below Jaxson Dart for me. Just again, your uncertainty. I don't know. I feel a little bit more certainty with Will Levis than Jaxson Dart.
Yeah. And do you feel like Will Levis is just kind of Sam Howelled himself, like where he got his couple of years and the whole league kind of collectively said, well, that was disastrous and we're not going to try this again.
It's just tough. It's tough when you're dealing with these raw players that you're just kind of not sure. It's almost. I mean, Jameis Winston, I think, has put some good things, very very good things on the field, and the league has kind of decided he's not a starting quarterback because he's put some very very bad things on the field as well. And Will Levis is not Jameis Winston.
It's a very good point. All right, last class. We're going to look at last year's class. And as a Bears fan, it pains me to say this, but Jaden Daniels should have been the consensus 101 last year. They went with Caleb Williams instead. We're not going to talk about Jaden Daniels because I think he is closer to overall dynasty QB1 than he is to any quarterback in this draft class. So he is way above anybody coming in 2025. And I can't believe I'm even saying this, Jeff, but I have to ask, Caleb Williams or Cam Ward?
Caleb Williams. I will still believe that Caleb Williams is a good football player. I mean, we had all of dynasty football tanked for an entire year to get Caleb Williams, and then he's still the stats weren't even that bad. It just was ridiculous, kind of probably ridiculous expectations was where a lot of it landed, and some really poor windows. But at the same time, we saw. I mean, didn't he set a record? He came close to a record of most consecutive passes without a pick, wasn't it, as a rookie? Or he definitely was doing some good things in terms of taking care of the ball. And you look at putting him with Ben Johnson relative to what he had last year. I mean, is there a quarterback that got a bigger upgrade in terms of coach this offseason?
I don't think so. No, I think that was it. And you do talk about it. Like everybody talks about Caleb Williams like he was this massive disappointment. Of course, comparing him to the history of Bears quarterbacks is setting the bar pretty low. But, that's what he came into. And Jeff, Caleb Williams, 3,541 passing yards, was fifth best in Bears history. 20 touchdowns, 12th best in Bears history. He had a 1.1% interception rating. That was the best among any Bears quarterback with 250 attempts. His 62.5 completion percentage, eighth best among any Bears quarterback ever. Those are big numbers that he was top 10 in Bears history. We're talking about a franchise that's been around for over 100 years. You can argue that last year, Caleb Williams' rookie season was the best quarterback season the Bears have ever had, and people are still going, this guy sucks.
So for context of that, Jim McMahon is an absolute legend, like with the Bears fans, and Jim McMahon's best year. How many yards do you think Jim McMahon had in his very best year?
I think it was like 26 or 2,700. It was not good.
2392 and 15 touchdowns. And this is like, he is a legend.
I mean, I've got Jay Cutler apologist in my Twitter bio. Like I have been just going for this guy for years, talking about how Jay Cutler was underrated. Never passed for 4,000 yards with the Bears. Never passed for 30 touchdowns with the Bears. And he is probably the best quarter. I mean, it's been bad, but basically what we're getting at is Caleb Williams wasn't that bad. I mean, like maybe when you compare him to Jaden Daniels, sure, it was disappointing. Jaden Daniels had the better season, but that doesn't mean the story is over for Caleb Williams. So I'm with you as well. I have Caleb Williams way ahead of Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, or anybody else in this class, but I think the YouTube and podcast audiences need to hear it as well. Drake May, Michael Penix, JJ McCarthy, Bo Nix, there are a lot of other guys in this class as well. So Drake May, where would he stack up for you? I mean, he had a very good rookie season. Are you putting him ahead of Cam Ward?
Yeah, I mean, Drake May, quarterback one in this class. I think Michael Penix, I'm putting him above Cam Ward. And JJ McCarthy, I mean, Bo Nix, we're putting him above Cam Ward. JJ McCarthy, you probably have to put him above there as well.
JJ McCarthy ahead of Cam Ward. So I don't disagree with any of the other ones. Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Drake May, Penix, Nix. I have all of them ahead of Cam Ward. But JJ McCarthy, I think, is the interesting one. I mean, this was a guy who didn't get the top 10. Yeah, he was it 10 or 12? I forget exactly where he went, but
I think he was 12.
Or was it 8? I can't remember. I mean, some inside the top 12. I mean, he wasn't a top 3 pick. Either way, I think I'd prefer Cam Ward to JJ McCarthy. I think that's the one disagreement we might have here. Just, still a very raw prospect. We know the Kevin O'Connell and Justin Jefferson, and we know the reasons to get excited about JJ McCarthy, but he's still just as unproven as Cam Ward. And I think for me, I'd just rather take the guy who's getting drafted number 1, even if it is in a weaker draft class.
So earlier in the show, you talked about our dear friend Cecil Lammey making a good point about quarterback success. And what did you say Cecil said about quarterback success?
Scheme fit is the NFL's dirty secret, is I believe the exact quote from Cecil.
And success, scheme fit, structure. I mean, JJ McCarthy's all of that blows Cam Ward out of the water right now.
You are right about that. Shame on me. I mean, maybe I'm holding on to a little bit of faith in Brian Callahan after seeing what he had done with Joe Burrow, but can't really compare Cam Ward to Joe Burrow. Still, I'm going to stick with Cam
Joe
Ward.
Burrow and Jamar Chase did plenty themselves.
I think they did. So Spencer Rattler, no, I'm just going to gloss over that. We're not going to talk about Spencer Rattler, but Joe Milton is worth the discussion. As I'm sure a lot of people saw, he was traded over the weekend in one of the most head-scratching trades that I've seen. Let me just lay this out real quickly for the audience. Joe Milton, drafted in the 6th round, had arguably the best game any quarterback had last year. Sure, it was a meaningless Week 18 game against Buffalo, but Joe Milton looked electric. He also showed some serious flashes in the preseason. Remember, I said the Patriots drafted him in the 6th round. So what do? They traded him to Dallas. They traded Joe Milton and a 5th round pick, or I'm sorry, Joe Milton and a 7th round pick for a 5th round pick. So they took what was a 6th round investment that looked really good for that cost. And all they did was a day 3 pick swap. And they said because they wanted to do right by Joe Milton. So now I guess instead of backing up Drake May, now he's backing up Dak Prescott. I don't understand what the Patriots were doing here. They had arguably one of the most high ceiling backups in the league. If you don't want the quarterback controversy, I get it. But Jeff, I don't really understand this one. I thought it was kind of foolish for the Patriots to move on this early for this cheap, unless they saw something in camp that they just said, wow, this is Fugazi. We need to get this guy out of here before the rest of the league realizes it.
Well, I mean, I think you one, I don't really know if I'd accuse the Patriots of being very well run right now, but two, avoiding quarterback controversy. I mean, this is Drake May's team. The way that we saw Joe Milton perform in that one game, I mean, if Drake May, God forbid, has any slow start at all, you are going to have people that are saying, well, maybe they should play Joe Milton. But the reason why we have this and talked about the last 4 rookie classes is just so we can get the SEO of Joe Milton trade, Dallas, New England Patriots. So,
well, as a Bears fan, I can tell you that as silly as it might sound to the viewers to say, like, when would people ever clamor to start Joe Milton over Drake May? Flashback 2 years ago when half of the Bears fan base was asking for Tyson Bagent over Justin Fields. It does happen.
I was going to say, I feel like last year we were almost close to Bears fans asking for Tyson Bagent over Caleb Williams.
Yeah. So I totally understand them wanting to move on from Joe Milton. I just, I feel like you could have got better than that, a day 3 pick swap, especially after what he put on film last year. But want to thank everybody for tuning in. Jeff Bell and I, we're going to be bringing you this show every Tuesday and Thursday between now and the NFL draft. Today, we're talking about quarterbacks, rookie quarterbacks, young quarterbacks, how they all kind of mix together. But on Thursday, we're going to have a really fun show. We're going to be talking about players that could be traded between now and the draft. So be sure to like, subscribe, comment, leave a review if you're listening on podcasts, all that good stuff. I want to thank you for tuning in, and we will see you on Thursday.